Now, before we begin, I want to let you know you should grab your favorite drink, probably something comforting and warm. Snuggle up tight in a blanket and keep with you your favorite guardian. Whether that be, like me, I have the Eskies. But you grab your favorite, whether that be one like them, or a stuffed animal, or a pillow, or whatever that is, because this one, this creepy creature, is the most frightening of any that I know of. Now, I personally am curled up in bed under my blanket with my coffee and my puppies, because just speaking of it is frightening. So on that note, here we go. Welcome back, everyone, for our next creepy creature. The last one was terrifying. This one seems worse to me. If you have small children, impressionable young minds that are easily frightened, you might not want them to see this before you do. With that warning having been given, let me describe to you what we are discussing. In the North Woods of Minnesota and the forests of the Great Lake region, as well as central regions of Canada, there is said to live a malevolent being called a Wendigo, often pronounced Wendigo. Now, this creature may appear as a monster with some characteristics of a human, or even as a spirit who has possessed a human being and forced them to become monstrous. The creature is historically associated with cannibalism, murder, insatiable greed, and cultural taboos against such behaviors. The creature has long been known among the Algonquian people, such as the Ojibwe, the Eastern Cree, the Saulteaux, the West Main Swampy Cree, Naskapi, and Innu peoples, many of whom have described them as giants, many times larger than human beings. Although descriptions vary somewhat, what is common to all of these cultures is the view that the Wendigo is a malevolent, cannibalistic, supernatural being that is strongly associated with winter, the north, cold, famine, and starvation. I'm going to read to you a description, more like a quote, that describes the Wendigo by an Ojibwe teacher and scholar from Ontario, Canada, where they are often cited. Basil Johnston says the Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tautly over its bones. With its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody. Its body was unclean and suffering from separations of the flesh, giving off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, and of death and corruption. It's bone-chilling, the description that he gives. makes you think, what really is it? Well, the Ojibwe also describe it as a large creature tall as a tree, with a lipless mouth and jagged teeth, its breath being as strange as its footprints full of blood, and it ate any man, woman, or child who ventured into its territory. Those were the lucky ones. Sometimes the Wendigo chose to possess a person instead, and then the luckless individual became a Wendigo himself, hunting down those he had once loved and feasting upon their flesh. It's not something I would want to venture across, much less survive. Now, according to most legends, the Wendigo is created when a human resorts to cannibalism in order to survive, usually in long, harsh, cold winters, where members of its party begin to die off from starvation, and eventually their instinct for survival forces them to eat one of their own kind. In the past, this occurred most often when Native Americans and settlers found themselves stranded in bitter snow and ice of the North Woods. Other versions of the legend cite that humans who displayed extreme greed, gluttony, and excess might also be possessed by the Wendigo, and thus the myth has served as a method of encouraging cooperation and moderation. But I guess that the question comes in, is it a myth? There are many, many sightings by very otherwise credible people of the Wendigo. Native American versions of this creature speak of a giant spirit over 15 feet tall that had once been human, but had been transformed into a creature by the use of magic. Though all the descriptions of the creature vary slightly, the Wendigo is generally said to have glowing eyes, long yellowed fangs, terrible claws, and overly long tongues. Sometimes they're described as having sallow, yellowish skin, and other times depicted to be covered with matted hair, although that is an unusual description, and I think maybe something else. The creature is said to have a number of special skills and powers, including stealth. It is a near-perfect hunter, and it knows and uses every inch of its territory, and can control the weather through the use of dark magic. They are also portrayed as simultaneously gluttonous and emaciated from starvation, often said that they grow as much as they eat, and because they continue to grow as much as they consume, they are always starving. They can never be satiated, never feel full or content. What a fate to have, and thankfully, not one that happens down here. Wendigos are said to be cursed to wander the land, eternally seeking to fill their voracious appetites for human flesh, and if there is nothing left to eat, then it will starve to death. Now, many believe that there are one of two ways to kill a Wendigo. The first being that they believe that the Wendigo has a heart made of ice, and that in order to kill it, you must first cut out its heart and melt it to kill the creature. That would be very difficult to do with something that moves at superhuman speeds and you can't see it or hear it coming. Now, aside from being able to capture one in order to cut out its heart and melt this icy core, the only other way that I've ever heard of to kill a Wendigo is to light it ablaze. And eventually, as it burns, it will reach this icy heart, thereby melting it and destroying the creature. So, we have starvation. We have the least likely thing, which I believe would be to capture it and cut its heart out and melt it. And we have, of course, lighting it on fire until this icy heart melts. It almost sounds as if the babies are guarding me against something, doesn't it? They are also known to absolutely mimic the sounds of members of your party, of animals, voices of humans calling for help in order to lure you out and get you alone. Because they hunt those that have been separated from their parties. The earliest recorded description of a Wendigo was from 1636. But in 1661, the French Jesuit missionaries who had enlisted help of the native nations in their area recorded an incident involving what they believed to be Wendigo. It is said that in this writing that they had been assigned to meet at a certain rendezvous point where they were to await the coming of the Jesuits, and had met their death the previous winter in a very strange manner. One has to wonder. It also says that they are afflicted with neither lunacy, hypochondria, nor frenzy, but have a combination of all of these types of diseases. And it affects their imaginations and causes them a more than canine hunger. I don't know canines to do that, but I think they mean ripping and tearing at their prey. It's also said that they were veritable werewolves. Well, let's throw that idea out the window, because it doesn't match any of the native descriptions of these creatures. Hollywood has done one heck of a job by adding antlers and horns and pointy ears and cloaks, and none of this lays true with the original texts or stories passed down by native shaman and indigenous peoples throughout North America. They're unlike anything else. They're often unspoken of, out of fear that to speak of them will cause you to become a target of one, or to then become one. I don't believe that that is quite how it works. But then again, I am not one of these peoples, and I do not live in an area where I would be in danger. There was a well-known case of a Wendigo hunter a Wendigo killer who was a native shaman named Jack Fiddler to the Europeans. That's what they referred to him as. It's said that he took his family out into the woods, and they were starving, and one by one as they died, he consumed them. But when confronted about the story, he stated that he had killed them in order to consume them. So this shaman who hunted Wendigos and helped his own people eventually gave way to becoming one himself. What a terrifying thought. But the thing that you hunt and try to protect your own from is what you will eventually be. Now, among the Assiniboine, and I hope that I pronounced that correctly, otherwise known as the Nakota, who are closely related to the Nakota Sioux, as well as the nations of the Cree and the Ojibwe. There is a satirical ceremonial dance that is sometimes performed during times of famine to reinforce the seriousness of the Wendigo taboo, the fear of it. They need these lessons of moderation and of moral standards to continue throughout the generations. And yet, in spite of all of this, the Wendigo creature sightings are still reported, especially in northern Ontario, near a place called the Cave of the Wendigo, and around a town called Kenora, where it has allegedly been spotted by traders and trackers and trappers for decades. There are still many who believe that the Wendigo roams the woods and the prairies of northern Minnesota and Canada, and they've even been spotted in Wisconsin and in the northern regions around Utah, and I think it's Montana. Anywhere that is densely forested or incredibly cold. I mean, think about it. Wouldn't they need the trees to hide amongst in order to hunt us? Should we choose to go camping alone in the woods in one of these areas, we could easily fall prey to one of these Wendigo creatures. What a horrifying fate. One that, thankfully, I can only imagine. The story of how the Wendigo came to be is short, but quite interesting to me. As the tale goes, the Wendigo was once a lost hunter, and during a brutally cold winter, this man's intense hunger drove him to cannibalism. Other members of his party had died, and he was starving to death. And so he committed what many would call the ultimate sin. This man's cannibalism was brutal and voracious, and when he ran out of other humans to eat, he began chewing at his own lips. Hence, they are known not to have them, or at least not much left. Now, after feasting on another human's flesh, he transformed into this crazy man/beast, roaming the forest in search of more people to eat. And this is why I say, if you venture to go camping in these woods, don't go alone. And Don't go to those strange calls that you may hear deep in the forest. There have actually been accounts of people in these Native American nations being in their homes and hearing the cries and screams for help of other human beings. Voices that are somehow familiar to them. Ones of people that they love. Sometimes the cries and screams of an animal seeming to be injured. But they are warned that if they allow this to draw them out of their home, well, then there may be no saving them from the Wendigo. Other stories in those same communities say that if you do not go out, then sometimes you will look up at a window and there will be this figure staring at you, trying to frighten you and lure you out of your home. Don't be fooled. Because you see, you never know what may be out there hunting and waiting to eat. Be careful, my friends who live in these areas. And keep in mind that at this time of year, it is colder and more dangerous out there. So don't forget that this Wendigo roams. And if you venture into these heavily forested areas, then you could become unsafe. But the main lesson of this is to remember not to be greedy, not to take more than your fill. And with that, my friends, I wish you very spooky dreams.